Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Welcome. I'm your host, David Wheatley, and this is one of our First Friday sessions. If you've not found those yet, pop to humanergy.com and you'll find the First Friday drop-down where you can sign up for a free 1-hour work session. During that session, you'll have about a 10-15 minute piece from one of the Humanergy team about something that's critical to what we're trying to learn today. And this time it's Lance Satterthwaite. Lance has been with us for 18 years, and he's presenting on the idea of doing more with less. And he covers three key strategies. The first one being wise about what will and won't get done, a sense of prioritization. Strategy two is the idea of how do you build the capacity to take on more and to add more where necessary. And then strategy three is how do you change the pace of what is coming in and going out, what's flowing through you in order to manage your stress and anxiety and self-care and mindfulness through whatever it is you're doing that's causing you to feel like you've got to do more with less. It's common in most of the clients that we work with, and Lance presents it in an interesting and engaging way. We join him just after he's started. Here's Lance.
So one of the, stories, analogies I want to share with you on this idea of workload and capacity is this idea of, a 5-gallon bucket, right? And what we know, imagine if we pour 5 gallons of water into the bucket, that's all it's going to hold. Like we can magically think and hope and pray that it will hold more. But the reality is capacity is capacity. It is all that it's going to hold. So if the idea of, as we put 5 gallons of water into the bucket and we begin to exceed that, things obviously are going to spill out, spill over. And so I just want to stick then with this analogy of, the water that we're pouring into the bucket, that is our workload that comes into us. The bucket itself, it is our capacity. And what I find is there really are three main strategies in how we go about doing this. And you'll see, actually, as I read through chat of what people are listing there. But these three strategies in my mind are either one, just let stuff spill over. Two, try and find a bigger bucket or a way to increase that bucket size. Or three, manage what's actually coming into the capacity or the bucket, right? So whether that's manage how much is coming in or how quickly it's pouring in. And so I just want to take then these three strategies and build them out just a little bit. So, this idea of like, well, we could just let things spill over and see where things land. The thing I would say about it is you better use wisdom on what is and isn't going to, quote, spill out, right? And so be really clear around things like what is important to you and the priorities, but it's also what's important to you and your key stakeholders, right? And what's important to them and what's important to the company. And ask and answer questions like, which items are most critical? What work that you're doing is most impactful? What's going to create the greater risk or the greatest risk? And then which of these items have highest visibility, right? Because we have to sort through what's going to go in the bucket, what's going to spill out. And then I would offer for anything that we say, okay, that's going to just spill out and spill over, at minimum, at least try and mitigate some of those consequences. So if you know you're not going to hit a deadline or hit a commitment, at least be proactive and give people a heads up or renegotiate early rather than just bury your head in the sand and hope nobody notices, right? So that's the idea of, if we're going to let things spill over. If that idea doesn't work for you and you're like, it's not acceptable to let things just spill over, then what I would say is then we better figure out how do we get a larger bucket, right? And what does that really look like? So I'm going to offer 4 thoughts around enlarging the bucket. One is, we hear this idea of increasing efficiencies, and I do think at least reflecting on how do we do that? So can you create a system that either helps you and your team to better organize the work and deliver the work? People talk about automation. So whether it's a use of a technology like AI, or maybe there are other programs that can help you and support you in the work that you actually do. When you think about repeatable processes that you and your team use, is it worth writing those down and capturing those, right? So you don't have to keep reinventing that wheel. How do you reduce, and everybody's favorite subject, reduce the amount of times in meetings by actually improving how you both design and facilitate those meetings, right? I think ways around how do we collaborate, whether that's virtually, the use of virtual and or use of shared documents. I think there's a number of strategies around just thinking about collaboration. And then in the chat, somebody mentioned, time management. There are a lot of time management tips and techniques out there that really do allow people to become more efficient. And so, just reflecting on this idea of how do we work smarter and not harder, I think it really is an important notion to consider as we're thinking about how do you enlarge the bucket. So a different way of making the bucket bigger comes down to how do we go about actually asking for people's help and delegate and coach to them? And what I would offer is I think pride is a really wonderful quality. And it's also a watch out, right? And so, in some ways, I know in the people that I coach, they can really struggle with asking for help. And in some ways, it's like they are the very thing that leads to some of their capacity constraints in the first place. So, if you enlarge the bucket and you're able to identify people around you who either might have capacity, who actually have the desire to learn new skill sets and want to contribute more, I think those are good people to think about asking for help, delegate, and coach. And so, yes, delegating and coaching to people can at times take more time up front, right? Especially than you just doing it yourself. But here's what I would offer: if it's a skill set that you know is going to be repeated in the future, then that's the stuff that we ought to delegate and coach people on because hopefully as you go forward, those colleagues can actually help out in times where you're overwhelmed or over capacity. And I would offer, and I think it really actually does build good teamwork. The next strategy around this idea of enlarging the bucket is at least over time advocating for increased resourcing. And again, I saw that, in the chat feature. And there's a couple things about this. I think one is whoever makes the decisions about that, you do have to give people real visibility and facts to how much time you're spending on various tasks because at least my experience is if they're not directly doing your job, they really honestly may not have a sense of what does it really take to get your job done. So even at times it may be, let me take you and let me show you when that's necessary. I do think this particular strategy is about your ability to influence. And so influence on a couple things. One, try and step into their shoes and understand really through their eyes what is most important to them, right? And then connecting dots from your work to the impact it has on the goals and the priorities that are most important to them. And then the other thing I would say is influence truly is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so I think on this strategy, at least know that it may take multiple conversations, multiple times, in multiple ways, really before you see progress on this front. And then, interesting enough, if you read through what people put on chat, several of you put, you know what, I'm just going to work longer hours. And the thing I would say about it is, while that may come as a surprise around a recommendation, sometimes it is simply the reality of trying to deal with capacity issues, at least in the short term. And I think it's like, okay, it may not be ideal or it may not be the good long-term strategy. And at the same time, what we know is work can ebb and flow. And so sometimes we do just have to put in the extra time at work. The thing I would say about it is hopefully that earns you some street cred, so to speak. It earns some trust and credibility, some respect from your colleagues on your commitment to deliver the results, going above and beyond. And yet, here's the caution about this strategy is if you're going to keep it a short-term strategy, just make sure you are really clear and set boundaries, especially up front around the amount of extra hours you are going to work, as well as the length of time. How long is that going to occur for? Because what you don't want to have happen is have this strategy become a new normal, right? So that's then the idea of like, okay, how do we get a larger bucket? And then, I think the third set of strategies goes into this idea of, well, can we change either the amount of work that's flowing into the bucket or even the pace in which it's flowing? So just want to share a couple thoughts then in that regard. I do think this is where engagement in crucial conversations with key stakeholders up front is critical, right? So these are the necessary conversations that forge alignment. And I think while saying no or pushing back, it can be especially hard to people of authority, right? Or if you're trying to be a good team player, I think it is a necessary skill set for people who are highly effective, right? I think it's a necessary skill set for high performing teams and organizations because what they have to figure out is what are we going to either delay or delete, right? If new and additional work is coming our way, what are we going to delay and or delete? The next strategy around this idea of like, let's be clear around key deliverables. And here's the question. It's like, have you ever been asked to do something, you end up putting a lot of hours in getting it accomplished, and then after the fact, you realize what they really wanted was far simpler and it just would have taken a lot less time, right? And that can be very challenging and frustrating. And so, how do we prevent that from happening? And I would offer, I think clarity up front is key and critical, and arm yourself with the right set of questions. So, things like, what are we trying to achieve and why are we trying to achieve that? What is the deadline? Are there boundaries and are there best practices for doing this work? Asking them or aligning on how much time do you think this is going to take? What resources could be available, what check-ins are needed for us to make sure we're on track, right? I mean, there's a set of questions there to make sure that you and the other party is on the same page up front. Plus, then that gives you the opportunity to say yes, no, and negotiate those terms up front, right? Before you ever sign on to doing this work. And then the last piece of this idea of looking at the flow of it is really thinking about, well, how do we allow or sort through what's going in the bucket and in what order? And I would offer, I think it gives you a better sense of control in these situations, right? So a little bit of structure can go a long way. And one of the analogies I would use is we all have the junk drawer sitting in our house, right? And you open it up and it just looks chaotic and kind of crazy. Well, what happens in good junk drawers to make it less chaotic is you may put up a couple dividers and you might say something like, well, I'm gonna put pens and papers on this side, maybe tools and tape in the middle there, and all the other miscellaneous junk on that other side. And all it does is it creates less chaos. You open it and it looks different. And I think then that's true of workload that feels chaotic, which is at least put some structure to your work. Right? Determine a game plan of what you're trying to accomplish this day, this week, etc. And determine not only what's flowing into the bucket, but in what order are you going to allow that stuff to arrive and deliver on. So this, these three strategies around this, certainly it helps a lot of people just sort through, well, what strategy, and maybe I'd pick strategies out of a couple of these different areas. And then I just want to highlight on the what not to do, right? Is so, here are the bad choices. One is just let the high priority items and treat everything the same and let the high priority items fall through the cracks, right? Two is just magically wish that it's going away and, do your best and bare your head and kind of ignore it. I do think, thinking short term versus the long term game is an important, almost like part where people get stuck in this is like short term, I'll just keep working longer hours. And it's like that in the long term, that doesn't help. And then, obviously just complaining about it, as opposed to trying to identify and propose real solutions with colleagues, are things not to do. So the last piece in this I just want to mention is regardless of what strategy you use and how you go about approaching this, I do think this idea of how do you manage your stress, your anxiety when you're overwhelmed in this. And so it really goes back into, in those moments, good self-care. Right, and that means different things to different people, but things around your exercise, your reading, your meditating, maybe it's listening to music, spending time with loved ones or pets, even getting enough sleep, right? Those are all really good self-care moments. Because I do think this idea of you better put your oxygen mask on first before helping others applies, right? So, be healthy, be good to people in those moments where you're stressed and can feel overwhelmed. It's going to help not only help you with the workload, but also help you remain a really good team member to your colleagues, as well as for those of you that depend on you outside of work.
That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanergy.com for many more resources.